Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. As you may have seen, President Biden delivered a speech in Philadelphia last night. We covered it live. A speech outlining the threats to our democracy and what he called the battle for the soul of our nation. Now, it was, of course, a political speech, as all addresses by a sitting president inherently are. But in the aftermath, one of the two major parties, dominated by the MAGA authoritarian faction the president was talking about, has been whining and moaning about how politically divisive it all was. Listen to the Republican leader of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who actually started whining about the speech before Biden had even delivered it.
President Biden has chosen to divide, demean, and disparage his fellow Americans. Why? Simply because they disagree with his policies. That is not leadership.
Say what you will about Kevin McCarthy, one of the finest orators of his generation. Senator and podcaster Ted Cruz of Texas echoed McCarthy, tweeting about how the president, quote, vilified millions of Americans in a divisive and angry speech. And there was just a lot more where that came from. Now, to be fair, they are actually not wrong about that core critique in a certain way. It was a divisive speech because some level of division is necessary when there is a conflict of this magnitude between two parties. One party wants to preserve the democratic constitutional order of our American democracy, and the other seeks to upend it. That may sound dramatic or hyperbolic or even extreme, but it is extreme because the truth is extreme. That is exactly what we are facing, as President Biden laid out last night.
Democracy cannot survive when one side believes there are only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated. And that's where the MAGA Republicans are today. They don't understand what every patriotic American knows. You can't love your country only when you win.
That line stuck with me. It's the dangerous distortion that Donald Trump helped create and that his followers believe. Elections are only legitimate if he and Republicans win. And more deeply, that power of the state, is only legitimately wielded by Republicans, even when they are in a minority. That view, that only we shall rule, is toxic, insidious, and completely at odds with living in a democracy. President Biden spoke about the dangers of this lie in his speech.
And they see their MAGA failure to stop a peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election as preparation for the 2022 and 2024 elections. They tried everything last time to nullify the votes of 81 million people. This time, they're determined to succeed in thwarting the will of the people.
Again, this is just plainly true, a factual statement of where things are. They are trying again to destroy the American experiment. January 6th was the first ever violent insurrection in this country that launched by a sitting president against his own government to stop the peaceful transfer of power. It's only happened once. It was the first time the peaceful transfer of power was interrupted since, of course, the great crisis of the Republic in 1861. Those are just the plain facts of the matter. And after that attempt failed on January 6th, a majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives, let us not lose sight of this, 147 of them voted to overturn the results of the election. They voted on behalf of the mob and the coup and Donald Trump and against the voters. They voted for minority rule for the president to stay in power against the will of us, we the people. And over the past 2 years, they have defended and facilitated the efforts of their leader as he plots quite openly another coup. According to the Washington Post, more than half of the Republican winners so far in primary races for positions that hold power over elections have embraced Donald Trump's false claims about his defeat 2 years ago. That's about 250 people who deny the legitimacy of Joe Biden's presidency and could soon be in position to help Trump overturn the next election. But these MAGA Republicans, as the president repeatedly called them last night, are nowhere near the majority of this country. President Biden spoke for the majority of Americans last night, and we see from the hysterical whining about his speech, the MAGA Republicans, who are indeed a minority, are flailing. They know they no longer have a lock on the midterm elections. Their leader is in increasingly dire legal peril. We saw Trump himself wildly lashing out yesterday, just hours before President Biden's speech, when he dangled pardons for the insurrectionists.
I will tell you, I will look very, very favorably about full pardons. If I decide to run and if I win, I will be looking very, very strongly about pardons.
Amen.
Full pardons.
Well deserved.
I think that's probably going to be the best, because even if they go for 2 months or 6 months, I mean, you know, they have sentences that go a lot longer than that.
Years and
but
years.
We'll be looking very, very seriously at full pardons, because we can't let that happen. What's happened here, and I mean full pardons with an apology to many, an apology.
Amen.
Not only does Donald Trump not apologize for leading an attempted coup on January 6th, he wants everyone to apologize to him, to his accomplices. He wants to pardon the criminals who savagely beat officers, infiltrated and overran the Capitol, desecrated the People's House, threatened members of Congress and their staff, and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." The people who have gotten the longest sentences that he mentioned there were the most violent. Those are the ones he's talking about when he wants to pardon. And we know from the investigations and charges filed against hundreds of them, they would have done far more damage if given the chance. Yesterday, the president spoke about the threat posed by those people, the MAGA Republicans, and on the same day, their leader announced he wants to pardon the most dangerous elements of that seditious faction. So yes, President Biden's words may have sounded extreme and divisive, and that's because we live in extreme and divisive times.